Hello and welcome to episode 57, Need to Know Remote Terminology. Before we get into this episode, I want you to know that if you want to fast track your remote career trajectory, head over to my website, stephanieholland.co, where you can sign up to hear more about my remote career plans and remote career consults. So let's get into this episode. What else is remote work known as? So quite a few things actually: telecommuting, telework, teleworking, telecommute, working from home, mobile work, remote work, flexible working, and distance work. And there may be more and more in the future. So depending on the job board you're searching on or the company you're talking to, remote may be referred to by any of these different terms. You'll just have to make sure you understand exactly what they mean by each term that they're using, because also everybody has a different idea of what all these things are, and especially how they work in their company. Now, another term you'd need to know is knowledge worker. Now, we covered this term in episodes 53 and 54, but just to recap quickly, if you have a laptop and you get paid to think and you use technology to create, transmit, and share that thinking, then you are a knowledge worker. So if you're a landscape gardener, this was the example I used in episode 54, this probably isn't you. But if you founded or you work for a landscape gardening company in any areas of governance, strategy, finance, sales, marketing, HR, R&D, IT, customer service, quality control, distribution, sourcing, design, product development, engineering, you get the gist, any department of the business side, then you are a remote worker. Next term is co-located team. Now, with the rise of remote and distributed teams, it's really important to know what people located in the same office are now referred to as, and that is co-located. So you're no longer an office team, you're a co-located team. So whether your company has one office or several around the world, sorry, massive truck just going by, just wait for them to leave. Oh, the joys of recording outside. So whether your company has one office or several around the world and most work is done face-to-face, other than the odd conference call, of course, then your teams are co-located. So think about the traditional company or office environment. That is a co-located team. Now, to add to the confusion, that's also known as an on-site team. Let's move on to remote team. Now, full disclosure about this episode, I did a ton of extra research for this episode to make sure I was giving you the right information. Yet people differ on opinion around all of these terms and definitions. Now, to my best understanding, God, I've got trucks and ants accosting me today. To my best understanding, a remote team, a remote company, is one that has likely some kind of headquarters, some kind of HQ office, and the rest of the team can work remotely in a single time zone or across multiple time zones across the world if they want to. But the office is there for them to use, and anyone in the team, if they want to, can work remotely as often as they like. In fact, the company is set up for their people to work remotely if they need to or want to. So for example, the founders may work together in a WeWork co-work office space and have a team of people working either from home in the same city as them, in the same co-working space as them, or around the world from other co-working spaces and from their kitchen tables. Now, one example is one of the remote companies I worked for recently. The founding team were based in an office in East London, but they were able to work remotely if they wanted to, and of course they did. They did a lot of business travel as well. And the rest of us were based in Mexico, Jordan, Afghanistan, and Greece. So we were a 100% remote team. Now, other examples of remote teams include Basecamp. Now, their HQ is in Chicago, and this is what they say on their website. We started out with 4 people, and today we're a company of about 50, spread out across 32 different cities around the world. Our headquarters is in Chicago, but everyone at Basecamp is free to live and work wherever they want. Many of us love working remotely. We literally wrote the book on remote working, and they actually did. It's called Remote, and it's really good. Go check it out on Amazon. Now, another example is Batchbook. Now, they have an office space in Providence, Rhode Island, with more than half of their 25 employees working remotely across the US, and the CEO and 7 of them who work from the office space the majority of the time. Now, for their weekly meeting, employees who work locally come into the office, and those in other cities and states tune in via Skype. Now, some companies like Trello have remote teams within their company, like their marketing team is 100% remote. And they also have a 50-50 on-site and remote approach. So some of the team work on-site in the office, and some of the team work remotely, either in a co-working space or from their own kitchen table. Now, blended team. Now, because of the blended nature of some of these teams and this 50-50 approach I've just alluded to, they're also becoming known as blended teams, which some people still think of as a combination of on-site and remote. Now, this blend can cause a cultural challenge. That a worker called Scott Hanselman, who's a 100% remote worker at Microsoft, he describes as an out of sight, out of mind challenge. And he says this in a blog post. A few months back, we had a stand-up meeting and a boss couldn't get the webcam to work. Now, it's been 5 years, but even now, they usually spend about 10 minutes messing about with a webcam before giving up and just having me call in. All this while, 20 workers who showed up stared daggers, I'm assuming, into the Klingon phone, and the guilt piles on. It's a really great blog post. I'll put the link in the show notes. But basically, this is a problem that actually the distributed team aims to solve. Now, a distributed team is the ultimate remote team with no central headquarters or office at all, where the entire team spread across time zones and national cultures, including the founders. Now, what they've done culturally and ideologically is they've left behind the us versus them mentality, or the kind of remote versus non-remote workers where there's an office involved. And they just think of themselves as one team. Now, even if there is a remote office, being distributed really, as I've just said, is much more of a cultural mindset that drives how they do everything. Now, a great example of this is my most recent remote contract with a fully distributed team. The founding team themselves are 3 people distributed across Hong Kong and Estonia, which is very unusual for a founding team. And they each work from home, and the rest of the team were based in Taiwan, Brazil, and me in Mexico. Now, being distributed really informs the way they do everything, because it has to, otherwise they just can't operate efficiently. Now, Buffer is another example of a distributed team with 79 employees working across 15 countries. And another is Zapier, who say this on their blog. At Zapier, for example, we're a 100% distributed team across 4 continents. The closest thing we have to an office is the kitchen table at our CEO's apartment. A remote structure is something that we committed to from day one, and for us, it's a way to maximize our impact. Now, the Hacker Noon blog post goes into much more detail about the different types of distributed teams. It's so interesting. I'll put the link in the show notes. Now, the term a company uses most often to refer to themselves as, whether they call themselves a remote team or a distributed team, really does come down to their culture or their philosophy of working. Now, they can also move from 100% remote to blended to distributed and back again, depending on the challenges they face as a business, and with collaboration and communication amongst their team, and how they decide to solve those problems. And most importantly, when you're talking to a company, you really need to ask or research beforehand exactly what terms they use, what these terms mean to them, how they are using them day to day, and to describe the team and how they work. And then you can talk to them on the same page and then ask more intelligent questions during the interview process. Now, reading their blog and their interviews in the press will let you know what kind of terms they're using, because a lot of remote and distributed teams talk a lot about how they run a remote and distributed business. Now, even if you're still confused, at least now you know the terms you need to start researching and becoming more familiar with. So let's move on to remote friendly versus remote first, which is more so, again, about the culture and ideology of a company and how they work. So remote friendly describes a culture of allowing people to work remotely and hiring remote workers either in the same city or in different countries. Now, it really signals an openness to enable greater freedom and flexibility and usher in the future of work. But being remote friendly isn't really enough, because just being open to the remote workforce doesn't mean your workflows embrace the company of remote work, so that everything really flows smoothly across remote and co-located employees, which is where the idea of remote first culture comes in. So remote first means that whether there's an HQ, a central headquarters or office, or 1,000 offices around the world, or no office at all, and part of this no desk culture, the remote worker is never an afterthought. In fact, remote first is baked into the idea of remote as culture of the company in a way that radiates from every single corner of the business. And they really do it as a matter of happiness and productivity for everyone. And they actively build their workflows around the concept of being a remote team, where people naturally jump on a video call, whether they're in the same office or halfway across the world from each other. Every single tool and process in the company will embrace the remote first ideology. Now, essentially, it means running the business in a way that is as equally beneficial and accessible to someone based in Argentina as it is to someone based in the same room as you or the same floor as you in London. Now, Stack Overflow give this example. Remote first means that when somebody wants to present something, they're not going to stand up at a whiteboard and write while the remote workers squint at their screens trying to see. We present electronically. It means when somebody refers to a document, they're not pulling it out of a file folder and passing it around the table, leaving the remotes out to figure it out on the laptop. They send a link to the whole group so everyone can see it. Now, other strategies, and lots of companies are doing similar things like that, making sure that everything they do is driven by a remote first mentality. But other strategies include everyone jumping onto a global video call from their laptop at their desk, even if the 10 of them are located in the same office. It means that everyone is on the same footing and removes the whole out of sight, out of sight, out of mind mentality described by Scott Hanselman, the Microsoft remote worker that I mentioned earlier in this episode. And it really feels like it means that nobody feels like or is even described as a remote worker. They are just your teammate, full stop. So I hope this episode opens up a whole new world to you and a whole new dimension to your remote job search, and exactly what to look for and what to research and what to really understand before the conversations that you're having. So crack open worksheet 5 in the podcast pack, where I've created a really fun quiz to help you remember your blended from your distributed. Now, if you don't have the worksheet yet, don't worry. You can grab a copy of the show notes located at stephanieholland.co/57. So that's it from me for this episode. I'll see you next week on the Thriving Empire podcast. Until then, keep living and working on your own terms so that you can build a career and a life you really want simultaneously. I'll see you next week. Bye.